Welcome to the Awakening Together channel here on YouTube. This is our Awakening Together weekly gathering. Each and every week we have a different minister who speaks. If you'd like to attend our services live, please visit our website awakening-together.org. Click on Online Sanctuary on the main menu. Then, How to Enter the Sanctuary. Our services are held Sundays at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time. We'd love to see you in the sanctuary.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday gathering this morning, our weekly gathering at Awakening Together. I wanted to read our statement of purpose for today's service. It is Awakening Together, core value number 5, which states that we accept all forms as temporary appearances, permitted through enduring awareness of self. We live this value by honoring all appearances and all experiences while reflecting continually on changeless truth. Thank you, Sina. So today's service today is entitled Vulnerability is My Superpower. And we're going to explore how when we become vulnerable, when we allow ourselves to become vulnerable, it can lead us into that courage that this song just spoke about, and into a greater awareness of our being. So starting out the service today, I'd like to do an opening prayer. So I invite each of you to take a nice deep breath and to settle into your chair. And just bring your awareness into your own being, away from the external world. Take 1 or 2 nice, soft, but deep breaths. And notice the stillness. Notice the stillness within your own being. Notice the stillness within your own heart. I speak today for all present in this room this morning, for all Awakening Together members, and for all beings. And I say that this still presence within each one of us, we recognize it as the truth of our being. We know it is the self within. We know that experiences, that appearances are but temporary manifestations of our own consciousness. Consciousness that emanates from the divine, for there is only the divine. We recognize this divine within ourselves and within every other being. We know that each experience when recognized as a manifestation of the spirit within is an opportunity for change. It's an opportunity to make a decision. Decision to exist within the presence of our own beingness, the self within, the truth that is beyond anything and everything in the universe, all appearances, all experiences, all thoughts, feelings. And we know as we do this, as we step into these experiences and recognize them as portals into our own divinity, that the truth of our own being is manifest. That we are in the presence of love, that we are the peace that surpasses all understanding, that simply is. And in this recognition of oneness and purity and love and light, I express my deepest gratitude and my appreciation for all that is. In this appreciation, say, and so it is. Amen. So the next thing on our schedule this morning is an inspirational reading, and we did something a little different this week. I have recently completed facilitating the Understanding Purification class, and that class has been an experience, need to speak for myself personally, that was so enriching and so expansive in terms of my own awareness of what experience is, what human experience is in this world, and how it can lead into that greater awareness of the self within. One of the things that happened in that class is immediately after the first class, the members of the class started emailing with each other and bringing forth experiences that enlightened them and brought forth their own inner wisdom. And this continued throughout the class, the 4 weeks of the class. And what I was inspired to do really was to pull from those readings and create a novel paper, really, a reading that we're going to do today. And 4 of the members of that class are going to be reading here from that reading. And I'd like to just mention who the authors are of this reading, because they are, each of the members of the class participated. And excuse me if I don't pronounce last names correctly, but Peter van Prugian, Judy Lekish, Jane Marie Sobel, and Michelle Hajnaki will be reading today. And other members of the class who will not be part of the reading, but have contributed immensely to the development of the reading itself are Arlene DeFeo, Isadora Karcher, Rebecca Sellers, and myself as well. So with that, I'll ask Peter to begin the reading.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Christy. Thank you so much. I'm reading a poem from Hafiz. Its title is The Gift. I used to live in a cramped house with confusion and pain. But then I met a friend and started getting drunk and singing all night. Confusion and pain starting acting nasty, making threats with talk like this. If you don't stop that, all that fun, we are leaving. Thank you.
And I'm going to read. Thank you so much, Christy. Beautiful to be here with all of you. I fell into a state of grace by the end of the class. It lasted all night, and this morning it remains. Spontaneous, deep breathing, thoughts quite lessened, and a feeling of peace that I have not felt in some time. Our group seems to have a remarkable synergy. I want to address further what we touched on about death and vulnerability. For I found that my own experience was a devastation that felt immense. Yet this devastation was a powerful portal to love. I looked at my beliefs and I found that this happening was no different than any other offering for healing. That's that life's will has given me. I once read that the death of a loved one is one of life's greatest hoaxes, in that despite cultural conditioning, it has no more meaning than anything else. And I was deeply offended when I read that. Yet in time, I came to understand the truth of this statement. Years later, I discovered a teaching that stated that within the world culture, there are many things that we are conditioned to suffer over, and that this conditioning is why we suffer. We are not taught to suffer. If our spouse leaves us for someone else, instead of celebrating that they have found a further way to love. In that vein, why are we not taught to celebrate a body's departure, even a loved one? Because that soul has been liberated from a life that knows inevitably pain and challenge. All suffering is brought on by enculturation, the ubiquitous, adopted set of beliefs that run counter to love. These raw and beautiful insights into the conditioning of loss, this collective grasping, motivates me to turn away from the world. For it's true that our culture conditions all with a lens of suffering and loss. Life is pain, and then you die, was the framework I remember from childhood. I always resisted that message, but I see how it worked its way under my skin. We are taught that there are some things in life that should and will kill us. I sense a cultural expectation that we be discontented. It's like an obligation. How dare you be happy when this is happening? Oh, I dare. I dare. I'm taking off the poop-colored glasses and no longer buying into the collective discontent. I want the joy and peace of God. It is given. It has sunk in way deeper how unnecessary words and thoughts are. I read once that in the beginning of humanity, there were no words, that everything was communicated telepathically. But words evolved into our being, even though words are an aberration of our true nature. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have thought a lot about your experience of the peaceful time you had when you were without words, but you still had the ability to operate normally within the confines of your body. This seems to me to be a Satori experience, and you are so blessed. You brought up how once we label something, we don't see it fully anymore. And you reminded me of the Adyshanti quote, that once a child is taught the word associated with a bird, they never truly see the bird again. Wow. As I listened to you open up about emotions, I was deeply touched, for I recognized myself in these stories. I have learned so much from what I have experienced already. Learning to slow down and be patient created a shift in my thinking and enabled more light and happiness to flow in. This discussion is one of those learnings that I hope will get sticky and stick. Often I have to accept that concepts don't always adhere the way I would like when I come upon them, but they do go into the soup and mix in exactly the way they are meant to. Thank God for that. And I'm so happy to be in the soup pot with you. When we let go of the barriers and limitations, the heart opens. I have felt a transformation that was so swift and subtle that it shook me to my core, and that I stepped out of something and into something new without fully experiencing some major event or known point of transition. Events have fueled me in a new way versus dragging me down. I let go of yesterdays and perceptions of me and just show up for the moment. It's been an incredible feeling to become aware of the separation of belief and what is true. I have learned to be present for others in their painful points and not to take it on or feel responsible for their choices. I recognize anxieties, face them, and allow them to move through me. It feels like healing and thriving at the same time, which I have not understood was possible before. This purification process is feeling like a gift. This may be complicated terrain, but we are blessed to have teachers and resources to help us navigate the way. My healing journey has hinged upon getting more acquainted with the innate wisdom of the body, with pain and trauma that can collapse in terrible confusion and in hiding for safety. All of my life, I felt driven to show my worth, including intelligence. In recognizing and reckoning in trauma, with trauma, one of the first messages I received was, "It's okay that you're not very smart." I remember standing with my hands on my 3-year-old hips thinking, "You don't know what you're talking about." I've been in the crucible of self-acceptance where logic and intelligence are most prized. With the tangible love of our mighty companions, I'm seeing how reclaiming and bringing full force to this innate intelligence is a cornerstone of this self-acceptance, this healing journey that I am on. I commit to be happy, unless, yes, some events seem harder to swallow than others. Thank you. Misha.
I experience these words as very powerful and deeply true. Falling into grace. The words grace, and it is given, which I begin more and more to understand as living in the given. I feel this to be the natural state intended by the source of love that loves us madly. In accepting perfection, I have not to be perfect, for it is given. This class is bathed in grace, and I feel that in every moment we spend sharing together, knowing together, loving together. Each is a light that illuminates brightly the truth that radiates lovingly within our group and beyond. I am moved profoundly by this experience, the totality of it, the transcendence of it. We are, each of us, blessed by the presence of others, and others seems an alien word to use because I feel the presence of oneness, the consciousness of the divine, moving through our group in a way that enlivens each of us, sparking recognition of the divine within. Each brings a unique perspective, opening the window of the soul, radiating vulnerability and truth, embracing all in the love of the heart. This purification work is opening up so much in me, and I am recognizing these walls that I haven't seen in this way before. Vulnerability is my superpower, and pure love emerges as I get out of the way. Although guilt is a source of pain, even in the face of a fear that is very primal, I ask, what if vulnerability really is my superpower? It is a given. I am immersed in the idea that love is a given. that seems to pop all of the bars off of the heart as love spreads wide open, rejoicing. Here I am, right now, love. This love is patient and kind and guides the weary traveler along the way. Thank you. Thank you. I know that God is doing his work in me. This leaves me in an astonishment that is astounding. For I ask myself, what can I possibly lose if I am already everything?
This is another poem from Hafiz. The God who only knows 4 words. Every child has known God. Not a God of names, not a God of don't, not a God who ever does anything weird, but a God who only knows 4 words and keep repeating them saying, come dance with me, come, dance. Thank you.
Points reading these inspirations and heartfelt expressions of inspiration and of love. And I am so blessed to be part of this group that was this class and still is. I just wanted to express that appreciation. So we're talking about vulnerability this morning, at least as a starting point. And I want to acknowledge that the quotation itself, what if vulnerability is my superpower, came from, within the class, came from Rhoda, because she attended our second class and she brought that, just in her sharing, she brought it forth. And we were talking about it after she left the class. She was just in that one class as part of the Awakening Together, I guess it's like an evaluation program of the class as an MPP. And the group really focused a lot on vulnerability. And that quotation, I asked Rhoda later where it came from, and it came from Saina. So thank you, Saina, also. And Saina apparently received that quotation from Dr. Sue Morton, I believe is the name of the original author of that quotation. But why would vulnerability be superpower? And when I think of vulnerability, I always think of Brené Brown first, because she's famous for her TED Talk and her books on vulnerability. And she speaks so eloquently about how we need to transcend our fears in order to move forward in our life. And she defines vulnerability as the ability to deal with uncertainty, to accept risk in our life. And what I think is really most important is to accept emotional pain. Brené Brown does talk in a very secular way. She's a social scientist, researcher. But it's interesting, what I find is what she says about vulnerability and the way it leads us to become more of the person that we are in this world. It parallels, her words parallel very closely with what we talk about here at Awakening Together. And what Brené Brown says is that we must be vulnerable in order to have courage. And courage is very important, because if we don't have courage, we can't expand. We can't open ourselves up, express the beautiful beings that we are. We remain closed within ourselves, fearful, afraid to go beyond this fence that we've built around ourselves that we, in our mind, thinks is a protection. But really what it is, it's a way of keeping ourselves disconnected from what is real, what is true, and from love, and also from other beings, other people. Brene Brown goes on to say that we need courage in order to experience joy and bliss. So in order to really, truly be happy, we need to be vulnerable so that we can be courageous. And when we can be courageous in the world, we can experience joy and bliss. And I will also add love to that. So when I was listening to her again this week while I was preparing for this service, it resonated so deeply with me how her words parallel what really what Regina has been talking about lately. She spoke about it at the fall retreat, and again at the there was a retreat in January, and I forget the name of it, Inspired Clarity. That was the name of it in January. And that retreat was very profound for me, and I know for many others. And essentially was a contemplation, one huge series of contemplations about consciousness. And the source material for the contemplations was Dr. David R. Hawkins. And Dr. David Hawkins he was an enlightened person, meaning he really focused on awareness in his life and had enlightened experiences really as a child. He was also a medical doctor and a social scientist. And along in his work, he developed a map of consciousness. And the map of consciousness, if you look at it, it's similar in some ways, actually in many ways, to the Four Principles of God, which is another map of consciousness. And Regina also talks about a map in the Course from the Ortex version of the Course. It's all the same teachings, And I love the principles, the Four Principles of God. What I like about David Hawkins' map of consciousness is the detail in it. So he brings us, it's first of all, it's numerical, but it's not arithmetically numerical. It's based on a logarithmic scale from 20 all the way up to 1,000. And what he says is that, because it's a logarithmic scale, base 10, right, exponential, even a small shift in consciousness, say from 20 to 25, even 5 points shift in consciousness brings much greater awareness and much greater enhancement of an individual's consciousness. And he also says, and Regina says this as well, teaches this, that we can expand our consciousness, and we can do it dramatically. Those of us, which includes each one of us in this room here, those of us who are spiritual seekers, who are on the spiritual path, who are seeking awakening, seeking to know the truth within ourselves, we can make great leaps in consciousness. And I can look at that map of consciousness that Dr. Hawkins has developed, and each of us can look at it and get a sense for where we are in terms of it, I would say, expanding our awareness. And what he says is within that scale of 0 to 1,000, I guess it's 20 to 1,000, excuse me. Anything below 200 it's in the realm of suffering. So we have different, it starts out with shame is the lowest at 20. Consciousness of shame. We all know what that is, I think. But then it graduates and we move into guilt. And guilt is actually a higher level consciousness. And it moves on into, I don't remember the exact progression because there are many different levels, but it moves on into grief, into anger, into apathy. And the highest level before you get to a tipping point kind of, is pride. And that includes spiritual pride. And that is just below 200. So when we reach a level of 200, he labels that level courage. So in terms of vulnerability, if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and we allow ourselves to explore, really to explore our suffering, whether we're in grief or shame, guilt, arrogance or pride, we allow ourselves to explore that and to engage in purification practices. And there are so many that we engage in here at Awakening Together. We can clear that suffering. Michael Singer in his books talks about samskara, which are pockets of energy within, they're really within our body, but they're within our consciousness. And he talks about those pockets of energy, and many of them come from unresolved emotional experiences, some of them traumatic, some of them perhaps just upsetting and disturbing. And what purification means, and Michael talks about this in all of his books, and Regina talks about this too, using different language, is when we clear these upsets, these deep traumas that have been in our being, in our awareness, in our consciousness, then we open ourselves up. Then we can let energy flow and we can become part of the oneness. But if we don't do that, if we don't become vulnerable and look at that suffering, that deep suffering that each of us carries in our own way, we don't look at that, we will remain below that level of courage, which is the start to a sense of liberation, a sense of freedom. So whether you look at Brene Brown, or you look at David Hawkins, or you listen to Regina or Michael Singer, they're all saying the same thing. Look at your suffering. I just attended the Michael DeForbes' meditation this morning, and he said something, he said the same thing really. He said, suffering is also liberation. So if we're willing to be vulnerable enough to go into the places within ourselves that hurt and are painful, all we need to do is be with that, because it starts moving forth. Michael talks about, he says, let it go. We're letting it go. So if we go in and we feel the energy of that pain and the suffering, and sometimes there's emotional release from that because it was painful when we encountered it. And if it's a long-held trauma, perhaps from childhood, we stored it there in our body and in our consciousness because we didn't want to experience that pain. So we stored it. And it's like this little packet of energy that's there just hanging out, but we start accumulating them. If our way of being in the world is to avoid our suffering and avoid our pain, then we start accumulating all these packets of energy that Michael Singer calls samskaras. And what happens is we become enclosed in our own safety cubicle, really. It's like a house that we built fences around, and we can't get out unless we go within. So going within is crucial. What is it crucial to? It's crucial to liberation. And where does liberation start? It starts with vulnerability, right? So purifying, being willing to look at our pain and our suffering, and then allowing it to be. Regina calls that rest, accept, trust. We don't need to do anything with it. Just allow it to move forth, and it does move forth. And then we can move into that courage level of awareness, of consciousness that Dr. David Hawkins talks about. And that is the beginning of liberation. We've gone through the suffering. It doesn't mean that more things won't come up, but we've reached a level of consciousness, which logarithmically on his scale is at 200 and above. I think it goes to 300 something, or maybe 250. I'm not sure. But once we reach the level of courage, we're open enough and we've liberated ourselves enough from the traumas that we've carried and the emotional upsets we've carried, which we all know come from beliefs within our mind. So we're really releasing beliefs in our mind, right, that are limiting and not true. So once we release those traumatic feelings, those emotions that have come from those beliefs, then we can be courageous in the world. And when we can be courageous in the world, we can start to be liberated. So we can be that way in the world, but we can be that way in our consciousness. So we don't need to be dictated by unconscious feelings or subconscious feelings of feeling rejected, feeling unhappy, feeling lost, feeling attacked, feeling so sad that we just don't want to get out of bed in the morning. And for me personally, I've been in purification for a long time. I started purification, and I've shared about this in other weekly gatherings, so I don't want to focus on it too much, but really it was about 12 years ago that this voice showed up and said, "You're no good." And it was a spiritual exercise I was doing, and I was just starting my spiritual path, and this voice came up and I was shocked. What is that? And one of my spiritual teachers at the time told me, "Oh, that's good." And I couldn't see it. "What do you mean this is good?" And I'm no good? I've come to see that it is good. I've been doing a lot of clearing. What's happened in the past 6 months, I would say, is that I'm focusing intensively on clearing. And that really started, I would say, in December when I attended Awakening Together's Releasing the I Am Bad Belief retreat. And of course, the I Am Bad belief is, it's a belief that manifests in many different ways and differently in each of us by the words that come forth. So for me, "You're no good" is what used to come up for me. And it still comes up once in a while, but it's kind of, I would say that my ego mind has realized I'm not paying attention to it now as much as I used to, and I definitely don't believe it anymore. So when it shows up, it's much quieter. But it took a lot of work to get to that point. Every experience that showed up in my life that was an upset, I went into my journal and I journaled about, why am I feeling this way? What's underneath this? I did a lot of root cause inquiry, and that process for me is just so purifying that it's helped me get to where I am right now. And this is 6 months later, where I don't listen to that voice in the way I used to. So one of the characteristics of being in the courage level of consciousness, David Hawkins's level, is that these beliefs will still come up, and these feelings, whether it's grief or shame or apathy, pride, they'll still come up, but you don't believe it anymore. So it doesn't run your life. It's not, you're not really a slave to your subconscious anymore. And I find that is what is happening for me. But I'm not done yet, because, there's a situation going on in my life right now with somebody that I work with, and a new variation of the I am bad belief has shown up for me. And that variation, Regina talks about this also, and I've been listening to some of her, what she calls her snippets of the early teachings. And she talks about the idea of being rejectable, or I am rejectable. And that is coming up for me now. And I recognize that I've carried that belief all of my life. I remember in grammar school thinking, you know, I don't belong here. I don't fit in. Nobody likes me. And just sort of separating myself out. And I wasn't bullied or anything. I wasn't friendless either. But I don't know why I had this belief. I had it. And it's colored my behavior and my interactions with people all of my life. And here I am in this stage of life, and it's coming up. And I know that it's coming up for healing. It's time to release this. And I have been invited to be a spiritual teacher because here I am right now. I've been invited. I've been invited to facilitate MPP classes, and I've had other invitations in my church here as well, locally. And so the invitation to be that presence for other people, to be that servant leader who supports the opening and the awakening for all beings, has come to me. And how can I be that presence if I'm walking around thinking that nobody likes me? It's not possible, right? So I know that's why this is coming up. It's time for me to release this. And this challenge that I have with this person at work is, it's not really resolved. And I think it's not resolved because it's not resolved within me. I was listening to one of the snippets of Regina's early teachings, and it's the second to last one. I think it's number 274. There's 275 teachings, and she talks about, her relationship at the time that was showing her through appearances, right? Showing her that she had this belief, and what she did is she created a mantra for herself, which I think of more as an affirmation. And the mantra was, and I'll use, my example here. The mantra was, it's not what this person is doing or saying to me that is causing me suffering. It is my own belief in my unworthiness, in my ability to be rejected, or my belief that I am able to be rejected. And what is that belief? The belief is really that I think I'm this person and I've been rejected by somebody else who's a person. But what is the truth? The truth is it's a belief in my mind, and this is not who I am. I am not my belief. I am not this person. The invitation for me, and I really extend that to each one of you here, thinking about purification and thinking about vulnerability and courage, is to go into those beliefs. Every time a circumstance comes forth in your life or in my life, to look at it, to do root cause inquiry, to recognize that I am not this person. This is not the truth of who I am. Therefore, I cannot possibly be rejected. It's not possible, because I am the I am consciousness. I am that Christ consciousness, the second principle of God. And I can only realize that when I've gotten to a certain place in my spiritual life and in my spiritual journey. I can only recognize that when I've allowed myself to be vulnerable, and when I've allowed myself to transcend that suffering through vulnerability and move into courage. And courage, I should just check time. What time am I supposed to stop here? 10:50. I think pretty much right on schedule. So being vulnerable is a portal, really, to being courageous. And then beyond being courageous, we can go into the higher levels of consciousness. The consciousness of love is at 500. And Regina says that she is in that consciousness. That's where she is now. And she feels herself moving into higher levels within that 500 level of consciousness. And the next level beyond that is unconditional love at the very high 500s, and then into joy and bliss. And going back to Brene Brown, that's just what she says. When we're vulnerable and allow ourselves to be courageous, we experience joy and bliss. So in closing, I invite each of you to look within yourself. To look within yourself and to make a choice if you'd like to be vulnerable, because it really is the portal to the higher levels of consciousness. And to me, that means it's a portal to the divine, because until I release those barriers, that suffering that I've held within myself, I've walled myself off with all of these energetic fences. I've walled myself off from the expansion in my consciousness into love, and ultimately into joy and into bliss. Thank you. The point in the service where we all share with each other if we'd like. So I invite anyone who would like to speak to please speak. We're trying to see. I have two screens here, so if you raise your hand, I won't see that if you're on the second screen. So you might want to use the electronic hand.
Listen, I want to just thank you and everyone in that class. I mean, what a joy. What an absolute joy to reach out and connect, and to, the opportunity. We were all talking about this yesterday in our dyads, that just to have a place and a space where these brave, courageous hearts can just come together. And yes, there's work to be done. And yes, lots of feelings. And yet, my gosh, doing it together defeats that, shame's main message, which is you are alone and there's nothing you can do about it. And so go hide. And it's the opposite of it, right? It's like, you're not alone. There's no hiding. And matter of fact, it's the portal. Stepping right into that is the portal. And thank you so much for bringing us that message today. I mean, that's the invitation. And you are a shining example of it, as are your mighty companions in the class. And just really, my whole heart is just wide open and with you guys. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Thanks. Oh, it's a busy morning. I work on Sundays, but I just love listening, and I just always want to make this time. I can't thank you enough, Christy. It's just so beautiful. I just feel like I just keep encountering the same resistance in my mind, and then being very, very hard on myself for it. And just using the practices, but sitting down and just really getting through it in the mighties. And I have a job right now where I feel like my nervous system is just constantly on overwhelm. I haven't experienced this, I'm not sure, ever in this lifetime. And it feels really vulnerable. And just to even be sharing right now with you guys, I can just feel the tears. So I just want to thank you so much. I just love you guys. Bye.
Thank you for sharing. Perfect example of walking through your vulnerability.
Say it can feel terrifying, but I know I'm safe. So thank God. Thank you.
Thank you. I love your dog. I had a black German Shepherd like that. Beautiful. Well, I guess if no one else is sharing, Sina, maybe we'll go into the final music. And before we do that, I just wanted to refer back to the last lines of the Hafid's poem that Peter read to us, which came from one of the class members in those emails I was telling you about in between classes. And the last line of that was, "Come dance with me, come dance." And this particular musical video is about dance. And it's the first element of this service that came to me before I even knew what we would be talking about here today. I had this one video and I knew this would be a part of our service. And it is a George Harrison musical selection. And I will just close by saying that his last words were purported to have been, "Everything else can wait, but God cannot wait. Love one another." Thank you. Thank you, Sina. Before we close, I just wanted to express my gratitude to all of those who have supported this service, from Sina and Rhoda and each and every person in the Understanding Purification class, and Awakening Together as a whole, and supporting me in my journey to be here today. And in that vein, I invite each of you to support Awakening Together. We are a nonprofit, and there's a QT code you'll see at the bottom of the screen there. And Sina is also posting a link for donations. All contributions are accepted with gratitude for many of the programs that we offer to anyone and everyone without fees, most of them. So I wanted to make sure I brought that in as well. Thank you, everyone.
You've been watching our online gathering. It happens weekly on Sundays at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time. To join us live in the sanctuary, visit our website, awakening-together.org. You'll want to click on Online Sanctuary in the main menu, and then in the drop-down menu, look for How to Enter the Sanctuary. Right there at the top of the page is a clickable link. We'd love to see you in the sanctuary and join with you in fellowship. Thank you again for watching. Also, please know that if you'd like to stay connected via the Awakening Together channel here on YouTube, you can subscribe and hit the bell for more notifications. We hope to see you in the sanctuary.